All right, so I don't think there was a team in the Western Conference that disappointed me more than the Phoenix Suns last season. But weirdly enough, even with them having a really good roster, a lot of people saw what happened coming, right? Like if you think about when they made that trade or that signing to bring in Bradley Beal, a lot of people knew from day one this thing could end up ugly, right? Not because Beal isn't a great player, not because Booker isn't a great player, not because KD isn't a great player, but there were a lot of questions about that trio. For one, there were fit issues, right? None of those three guys are amazing playmakers. All of them are score first players. I remember people were kind of hyping up Bradley Beal's playmaking abilities and saying things like Frank Vogel could put him as their full-time point guard and doing the same with Devin Booker, but they just were not optimized in that position, and none of them were able to truly facilitate that offense very well. People were also very pessimistic about it because those three guys have had a ton of injury issues. Didn't bother Booker a ton last season, didn't bother KD a ton last season. I think he was the healthiest out of all three of those guys. I'd have to go back and look, but Bradley Beal did miss a substantial part of the season, and that definitely affected their chemistry in a major way. They were never truly in sync together as a trio. And it was one of those times where a super team gets put together and fans immediately were like, this isn't going to work. There are going to be a ton of problems, and they proved us right. They were very underwhelming throughout the regular season, and once they got into the playoffs, their lack of chemistry and their lack of a strong identity really hurt them, and they lost in the first round in embarrassing fashion to Anthony Edwards and the Minnesota Timberwolves. But I do think that this offseason, they have done a pretty good job at addressing some of their biggest issues that they suffered last season. For one, biggest thing I talked about was there was a major lack of playmaking. Guys were just chucking up shots. They weren't getting the most efficient looks. And if you're going to have all of those players together who are like score first players, there has to be some level of playmaking. There has to be a guy out there who's going to temper and control the offense. And as I said, they tried to make it Bradley Beal and tried to make it Devin Booker as like the full-time point guards on that Suns roster, and it just didn't work, right? And there is a trend through like the last couple of seasons where we've seen these coaches see certain guys that are great passers and try to make them full-time point guards. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. So an example of it working was 2020, where the Lakers did not have a true point guard on the roster, so they decided to start LeBron James at the point, and he was great. He led the league in assists that season, averaged a career high in assists, and the Lakers ended up winning the 2020 NBA Finals. But there were also some times where it just really didn't work. So for example, the Bucks under Jason Kidd started experimenting a ton with having Giannis as the primary ball handler and orchestrator, and it did show off his great passing abilities. That was kind of when Giannis alerted the world that he is a great, underrated playmaker, but he was not fully optimized at that point guard position. So again, the Suns tried to do that with Booker and Beal. The issue is just because they can play the position and they can pass well doesn't mean the offense is optimized with those guys playing that point guard position. There was such a lack of playmaking consistently that they tried to run a lot of their stuff through Yusuf Nurkic, which also just wasn't the best for their offense as a collective, right? So we knew their biggest need was getting a really good, efficient, great decision-making point guard, kind of a game manager type to fit around Devin Booker, Kevin Durant, and Bradley Beal. And they did a great job by picking up free agent Tyus Jones, who was one of the most underrated players on the market. He signed a one-year deal with the Suns. So essentially, he is kind of betting on himself on the one-year deal. He is trying to set himself up to make more money next offseason. So this gives him a ton of incentive to play at an extremely high level this season here for the Suns and give it his all. Luckily, this is the perfect environment for him to shine. They have a glaring need for a player like him. He can slide right into that position and give them a ton of value. For one, he is a very good ball handler, generally known for his ability to take care of the ball and limit turnovers. His assist to turnover ratio the last couple of seasons was insane. Also, considering that last season, he was playing for a horrible Washington Wizards team, and he is also a really good three-point shooter. He was 41% last season, great off the catch, so he can play well when he's in off off-ball situations and has gone at least 37 from deep in the last 3 seasons of his career. And I talked about it briefly, but the playmaking, he averaged 7 assists per game last season, playing for the Wizards, again, with a limited amount of consistent offensive options. Kyle Kuzma was probably their most consistent guy. We know Jordan Poole struggled, and he was also kind of splitting those primary ball handler duties with Jordan Poole. Putting up those assist numbers were super impressive. And they also got a really good backup point guard in Monte Morris, who'll be coming off the bench. Another really solid option as a mature point guard, decision maker, kind of game manager type of guy. He hasn't done it as a starter in a minute, but I do remember him back in his Denver Nuggets days. He gave a ton of value to that team as they ended up making the Western Conference Finals in 2020. Hopefully he can bring some of that to the table for the Suns team. But like I said, their biggest issue was there is a major hole when it came to playmaking and just having somebody who's going to be mature and run that offense. And he is that guy. Tyus Jones is that guy. Monte Morris off the bench can give them a ton of value at that position as well. I don't care who you are. Everybody needs that game manager type of player, right? Like that Mike Conley type of guy who's just going to kind of bring things together and glue the offense together, right? So if you look at the Celtics, right, Derek White isn't like a super high level playmaker, but he's a really efficient, smart lead guard who can orchestrate the offense and does things at a high level, doesn't make a ton of bad decisions. That's what you need, right, to kind of complement your scoring-minded guys. So for the Celtics, that's Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. They needed a guy like Derek White who can kind of temper things and bring things together. That's what Tyus Jones could do for this team. And again, this is like the biggest role he's ever played. So is he ready? Right? He hasn't played a ton deep in the playoffs before. We'll see. But judging from what we've seen already in his career, he is perfect for what the Suns need in order to get over that hump and be a real contender, a real championship contender this coming season. And I've seen people critique them a little bit for this, but I'm actually a fan of their depth and their rotation guys. So let's think about it. There's Royce O'Neal. There's Grayson Allen, who was just lights out from 3 last season. There's Monte Morris, as I just said. There's Josh Okogie coming off the bench. And there's also Mason Plumlee, right? And they could add some more pieces from here. There could be some other moves down the road to flesh this out. But I do think that is a solid set of experienced rotational pieces on this particular roster. And there are still a few concerns. So for one, their perimeter defense was not great last season, and they didn't do a ton to improve on that in this coming season. So Bradley Beal, Devin Booker, and Tyus Jones are not amazing point of attack defenders. Royce O'Neal is, but there is a shortage for this team in that particular department. Josh Okogie is a strong defensive player, but he's pretty much unplayable on the offensive end. He shot at just 30% from deep in 60 games last season. So I do think the perimeter defense, especially when it comes to guarding guards, is going to be very important for them, especially when you're looking at how things were last season, where these amazing perimeter attacks were just killing throughout the playoffs. So if you look at the Dallas Mavericks, or even out in the East, you look at the Boston Celtics, perimeter defense is extremely important, more important in this era of basketball than we've ever seen. And the Suns just don't have a ton of guys who can help them with that. But I do think they fixed their biggest issue, which was a lack of playmaking and a lack of organization on the offensive end to make those guys glue together and fit together. They got that right. I think this is a really good team on paper. Their biggest thing now is health. If you don't have health, those guys are never going to truly be in sync with one another. So maybe things would have looked differently last season if Bradley Beal was healthy the entire way through, right? Maybe if he played at least like 65 games, then the playmaking issues wouldn't have been as apparent and they would have been better as a team collectively. Who knows? But health is going to be key for this team if they want to get over the hump. We've seen it before. As talented of a duo that Kevin Durant and Devin Booker are, that's not going to be enough in the Western Conference. That duo is elite offensively. Those are 2 elite scorers, but they still are going to see a ton of limitations in a playoff series. So they need these 3 guys playing together. And on top of that, like I said, it was great they got Tyus Jones and Monte Morris as great floor generals and point guards to glue things together. But if the health is there for the Suns, this finally looks like a title contender for sure. It's just going to come down to health, but I really think they addressed their biggest issue this offseason, and maybe some of their interior issues are things they need to look at as well. Yusuf Nurkic wasn't great when it came to playing down low on the interior last season, especially last postseason for that Suns team. But I think they solved their biggest issue. The Tyus Jones pickup is simply one of the best pickups throughout the entire offseason. They literally addressed their biggest issue. And as I said, with his contract and the way things are set up, with him being on that 1-year deal, there is a ton of incentive for him to play at a high level and possibly play the best basketball of his career. I've always thought he is one of the most underrated point guards in the league, and it's time for him to show the league what value he can provide to a contender finally. So I'm excited for Phoenix, and this is definitely a redemption season for them. And I would definitely say it's also kind of a championship or bust season. Their last couple of years after making the finals in 2021 have been underwhelming. And the roster has only got more talented since then, but they've gotten worse when it comes to how they're ending their seasons. So the pressure is definitely on this team. I've got faith in them, but as I said, it's going to come down to health. But this is a very scary Suns roster, and hopefully they can put it all together this coming season finally.